At 8 o'clock, I buckled on my canvas gaiters, thrust some crusts of bread, a lemon, a small flask of cold tea, 4 hard-boiled eggs, bade goodbye to my friend, and I set off. Climbing the ridge to the left and keeping along its top for a little way, I then struck across a semicircular head of a wide glen, in the middle of which, a little lower, lay a snowbed over a long, steep slope of loose, broken stones and sand. Mounting steadily along the same ridge, I saw at a height of over 13,000 feet, lying on the loose blocks, a piece of wood, about 4 feet long and 5 inches thick, evidently cut by some tool, and so far above the limit of trees that it could by no possibility be a natural fragment. Darting on it, with a glee that astonished the Cossack and the Kurd, I went up to them, made them look at it, and repeated several times the word Noah. The Cossack grinned, but he was such a cheery, genial fellow that I think he would have grinned whatever I had said, and I cannot be sure that he took my true meaning and recognized the wood as a fragment of the true ark. So, Hassan, that was my overly dramatic reading from the true account, maybe, of a British explorer named James Bryce, who in the year 1876 summited the mountain of Ararat, today in Turkey, back then part of the Ottoman Empire, and dramatically recalled how he found this piece of wood way above the tree line, which he took to be a fragment of the Ark, Hassan, Noah's Ark, that survived the global flood. And that's what we're speaking about today. Now, maybe, Hassan, is it possible that good old James Bryce, who, by the way, later became British ambassador to the United States, I don't know if it was by virtue of his accomplishment on Mount Ararat, is it possible he was looking for something that he could not find? I mean, did the flood of Noah actually take place? Was there any ark at all?
The short answer, Gabriel, to your question is no. To put it bluntly, the flood account, as we have it in most interpretations of the biblical text and its ancient Near Eastern parallels and subsequent reception, is a global flood covering the entire surface of the earth up to the highest peak and then some. And such a flood is just scientifically speaking impossible.
It's very, very disappointing, Hassan. I mean, all the drama from James Bryce, the ark. Yeah, so, I mean, I guess it's a spoiler at the beginning of the episode, but this did not stop people having immense interest, and there's actually a greater excitement, a historical excitement. People are always interested in searching for the ark, coming up with scenarios by a way in which it might have happened. I mean, why are people so, what is the drama? What is the attraction of this story?
Well, I mean, it is a fascinating story on its own rights. The idea of a single man and his family withstanding, this global catastrophe, some like a catastrophe of global level before globalization, before the world was connected. Yet, we all kind of share in some sense in this catastrophe.
Yeah.
And then two, the other part of it is that it's very interesting. We have flood accounts and narratives in many cultures spanning continents. Not in every culture, interestingly, which I will talk about a little bit later, but even some Native American tribes have stories of a global flood. We find sometimes seashells on the top of mountains. All of this has kind of maintained this sort of attitude amongst believers who their scriptures recount a story of a global flood under most interpretations, that while something like this really must have happened, and then you have the story of the ark resting on the Mount of Qardub, in our parlance, Ararat.
Yeah, so Genesis speaks of the mountains of Ararat, probably
Yes.
some geographical region, but everyone just kind of took, I don't know how it became the assumption, but that it is Mount Ararat. And now today there is in Turkey Greater Ararat and Lesser Ararat, these two mountain peaks that are called Mount Ararat.
And
You
someone
mentioned
left a piece of wood up there.
apparently, yeah. You mentioned the problem of it's just too much water. Other people mentioned or have noted that the mix of salt and fresh water, there's problems there as well. I mean, plus there's the animals.
Yeah.
I've seen the Noah movie that came out in like the year 2000. The animals in the movie they got on the ark, but it's pretty complicated to bring a pair of every animal on Earth into the boat and then keep them from maybe eating each other. Like, were they feeding them all?
Well, the feeding thing is funny because the Ark Encounter actually does try to explain how they could have been fed. The Ark Encounter is a museum in Kentucky.
Yeah.
That has a replica of the Ark, and you can go in it, and check it out. And they really insist that the global flood happened kind of just in the same way, including even that dinosaurs were on the Ark. So yeah,
so high ceilings.
Yeah, high ceilings. Some of those guys were pretty big.
Yeah.
But I remember when I was a teenager, I saw a debate between Bill Nye and the guy from the Bill Nye the Science
guy. Yeah.
Which, funny enough, I guess he's an engineer, and I don't know, maybe I heard somewhere he's not like a PhD scientist, but regardless, it doesn't matter. He
maybe much to his credit, he has a real job.
Credit. Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
But he made the argument that, well, if you had all of these animals migrating, 2 by 2 or whatever it is, to go to what's today Palestine and Israel, to get on the Ark, you would expect some of them to die on the way. Yeah. You would expect fossils.
How do the penguins, the puffins?
You would expect, you need land bridges, you would need so on and so forth.
Yeah, and what if more than 2 came? You have to say,
they have to cast lots, maybe, I don't know. Well, so funny enough, even, I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but some animals, it is more than 2, it's 7 for clean animals. So
yes, and of course in biblical, we're going to get onto the biblical account.
Yeah.
There are arguments which may or may not be convincing that there are 2 different traditions sort of brought together in Genesis 6 through 9. So the so-called Yahwehs, the so-called priestly source that have different details, different math. Before we get on to the Bible, Hassan, there are some pretty awesome stories. And, we don't spend all our time just recounting adventures of people going to Ararat and, searching for the Ark. But, I found, through my extensive research in various old dusty manuscripts, that there's an account of someone named John Joseph Nouri, which strangely, this is also mentioned on Wikipedia. I've heard is mentioned there as well. So this is a gentleman, John Joseph Nouri, who is he's a Chaldean Christian, originally from Baghdad. So as all Ottoman Empire in the 19th century. He claims to have found Noah's Ark. He was a deacon of the Chaldean church, and then he had a tour of the United States where he used the sort of credential of founder of Noah's Ark to get admission to places, to give lectures, collect honoraria, and he had these formal titles. So I won't go through all of them because there's too many. But John Joseph Nouri presented himself in the United States as, quote, His Pontifical Eminence, the most venerable prelate, Monseigneur John Joseph Prince of Nouri. Wait, there's more. Chaldean Patriarchal Archdeacon of Babylon and Jerusalem, Grand Apostolic Ambassador of Malabar, India and Persia, the discoverer of Noah's Ark, and the Golden Mountains of the Moon. No idea what those are. Anyway, the story is that I found in one of those manuscripts is that he attended the Parliament of the World Religions in Chicago in 1893. And then he was robbed at some point and left at some insane asylum. I guess the Napa Insane Asylum, wow. Which took him into custody as a patient. So, be careful going on, making claims or going on an expedition to
That's
Ararat.
Quite funny. I should embellish my LinkedIn bio that way. So, but I want to quickly mention just maybe we touched on it briefly, but just quickly why the Ark, because, the flood is still, I think, close to many people's thoughts and hearts, maybe. So I just want to mention kind of 4 reasons principally why probably not. In
As a
terms of a global
historical
flood.
event.
Yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
scientifically, historically, a global flood is implausible. One, there's just no geological traces that can be found of that much water, that much flooding, literally across the continent. Secondly, is just the amount of water. Right, it would require, I think, 4.6 billion cubic kilometers of water. Um, no rainfall ever recorded in human history, even based in nothing that we can model backwards. Ever could even approximate something like that. Um, Now we also have the mixing of fresh water and salt water. In this case, this would be an insane amount of fresh water if it's coming from the sky, to be which would kill almost all saltwater life on the planet. In addition
And
to
the
that,
fish are not in the ark, right? Some
no,
of
the
them are
fish are
supposed
not
to
in the ark.
survive.
Yep,
Hmm.
they can survive, but they wouldn't in this case, if we're speaking scientifically. And, you know, the last one we've already mentioned, which is just the logistical
Yeah.
impossibility of bringing all of the animals that are
And only
currently on the planet.
8 people, is that
Yeah,
right? I mean, there's only 8,
eight plus
Noah, his
some,
wife.
Yeah, so there's the 8 of them, and then some traditions. It's funny, we'll get into this later in terms of its interpretation. At least in Islamic tradition, there is speculation about up to 70 or 80 people on
Yeah.
the ark, which includes kind of like the extended household of his sons and so on and so forth.
Yeah, but you make a good point, Hassan, when you say that the flood story is near and dear to people's hearts. And of course, I think it's no surprise that we might speak about its theological importance along the way, both for the Bible and for the Quran. I mean, in a way, would you say, Hassan, that the story of the flood is a great case of whether you read scripture as a sort of record
Yeah.
of historical events, like, I don't know, data that is kind of transmitted to us so that we can understand history better, or rather sort of divine guidance, which is useful for the soul. I mean, it's kind of a place where you diverge on that. So maybe you can do both, but you see what I mean by that?
Yeah, so what's tricky here is that there is a long history of Christian, Jewish, and Muslim interpretation, probably others, of taking the flood as just a historical given, right? Just on the testimony of Scripture itself. Um, so there's that. In recent decades, centuries, I think because of the scientific evidence being made available, and sort of even as early as Da Vinci, in the 1400s, was able to sort of um, question some of the arguments for a global flood that were popular at the time. But this has made holding to the simple testimonies, let's say, the simple historical account, the simple account
Genesis as
in the
record of what
Genesis.
really happened.
Exactly. Now, it's interesting, like, there are different, of course, you could, this is a big topic, right? But there are many ways that people of, across traditions have engaged with their scriptures, right? So I think that more recently there is more of an impetus to go towards more of a literalist historical reading of the Bible. I think if you look at the fathers of the Christian church, then you do see that in many instances, though interestingly not this one again, because it was just a simple given. There's no reason to doubt it, but in many other instances, they do engage with the Bible in a way that isn't straightforwardly historical, right?
Emphasizes its spiritual guidance,
Right. So
its
they
deeper,
see
deeper spiritual lessons.
absolutely, and they see in different pericopes of the Old Testament, be it the garden, be it the flood, be it Babel, be it the Israelites and in Egypt and the plagues, or the conquest and everything after. They see in that different signs or types for the church, Christ, the battle between the soul and the demonic forces, the ascent up to God, virtue, so on and so forth. I have a quote I actually prepared from St. Augustine, who was a early 5th century Christian theologian and later bishop as well, who first of all, in his Confessions, which is an account of his life, he mentions how he finally begins to take the Christian scriptures seriously once he's exposed, or learns of rather, the allegorical method, which he learns from Ambrose
This
in
is
Milan.
5th century.
Initially, he's dismissive of the Christian Bible, and later, through this spiritualized, engagement with it, is more open to it. So I'll just briefly read what he has to say about the flood and the ark, especially here. He says, undoubtedly, the ark is a symbol of the city of God on its pilgrimage in history. It is a figure of the church that was saved by the wood on which there hung the mediator between God and men himself, the man Jesus Christ. Even the very measurement of length, height, and breadth of the ark are meant to point to the reality of the human body into which he came, as it was foretold that he would come. It will be recalled that the length of a normal body, and here he talks about a normal body is 6 feet, and this corresponds to some measurement of the ark
in the Genesis account.
Yeah, and then he talks about the door on its side that symbolizes the open wound on Christ's side that's made during his crucifixion. He sees in it kind of throughout the story where Noah, in Genesis, a symbol for the church or for Christ, and this is kind of the this is the universal sort of patristic way of engaging with Scripture. Now, I'll just this is long-winded now, but it's not to say that Augustine almost certainly thought the flood happened as a historical event, but I think what's important for some believers today is that they see this engagement with Scripture as a way to as a way to keep the text close to their heart, even when historical literal reading isn't plausible. So you have another church father, Gregory of Nyssa, who, when he's talking about the death of the Egyptian firstborn, he says that, it's possible that this actually never happened in his life of Moses. But that the spiritual meaning is still important.
Is still valid. So what I propose, Hassan, is that in our next section, we give our beloved viewers kind of both perspectives on the biblical flood story, and then we're going to get to the Qur'an soon after, which has dramatic differences from the Bible. But let's talk about both what the Bible says in its account of Noah and maybe more of its possible spiritual interpretation. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened, and rain fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day, Noah and his sons, Shem and Ham and Japheth, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of the sons, with them entered the ark. They and every beast according to its kind, and all the cattle according to their kinds, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind, every bird of every sort. They went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh in which there was the breath of life. And they that entered, male and female, of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. So, Hassan, that is the account of Genesis, where the floodwaters break forth from the great deep, and dramatically, not only do Noah and his wife and his sons and their wives all get in with the animals, but the final line, God himself shuts them into the ark. The Lord, I think, Hassan, is a reference to God there.
Yeah, that would be Yod He Vav He, YHWH, the divine name in the Hebrew Bible.
So, I mean, this is a dramatic moment in the first book of the Bible, in the book of Genesis. But the story actually begins before there, right? I mean, it's a story of Noah's righteousness and the people, maybe all of the people's unrighteousness.
Yeah, it's a building crescendo, right? So we have after beginning with the fall in Genesis 3, and then Lamech, and kind of and Cain and Abel, and then this kind of rising crescendo of human wickedness, and then you have the weird sons of God going into the daughters of men, and then finally it boils over in during Noah's generation. So God is pleased with this man Noah,
Mm.
and which is structurally important for the story, but we won't go into that too much. But he and his family are kind of the only humans saved. They're put in this ark with all the animals, kind of like the garden. You have the garden of Eden with all the animals and the first man, and then you have the new first man, Noah, with all the animals in the ark and everything else. All the evil things are destroyed, right? So in a sense, it's like a new creation. And yeah, there's an interesting, that's an interesting parallel.
Yeah, that's a key insight, Hassan, that there are deeper thematic connections to be found in Genesis instead of maybe just reading it as a kind of blow by blow chronicle one year after another.
Yeah.
There's something more intricate going on. And yet, Hassan, this is not the first time that a story was told about a flood. And maybe divine wrath as well, and maybe divine election of one person. So the Genesis and much of the Hebrew Bible has a connection to earlier ancient Near Eastern myths.
Yeah. So and this is in the ancient Near East. This is very old. Maybe some of the tablets could be as old as 3000 BC.
So by tablets, we're speaking of Mesopotamian,
cuneiform,
tablets. So either the Sumerian language or Akkadian, which is a Semitic language. I think Sumerian is its own thing. So basically, what is Iraq today? That kind of region.
Exactly, and the Sumerian Atrahasis myth is probably the oldest of these accounts, and some say it may itself be the source of another myth of, in Babylon, the Gilgamesh epic, right? So you have, and there's others too, and other minor spin-offs, and sometimes even multiple versions of these. But one thing these all have in common is that, generally speaking, they predate the biblical account, and they have this global flood. They have a wooden ark. Dimensions differ, but the gods or the god, for two different reasons. Actually, it's interesting. In some accounts, it's random, right? Or it's not. In some accounts, it's out of sort of regret or anger towards humans, right? In the biblical account, God regrets his creation, right? He actually feels. It seems like he had
high expectations for humans.
He feels
down.
Sorrow, and then in other accounts, it's more random. It just sort of happens. Humans didn't necessarily do anything wrong to merit it. But a hero and his family are put in like a wooden box or an ark and have to weather the flood. And it's very interesting. The way it's put now is that this is most likely a common language, a common symbolic and narrative language to speak about primeval events, to have theological discourse in the ancient Near East. And
chaos of the waters, maybe, is chaos a thing in there? Waters. People speak about, what's her name, Tiamat, as like this
Tiamat,
Mesopotamian chaos goddess. And
and the chaos is present in Genesis 1, right? You have
the tohu
the
and
choshek,
bohu.
you have the tohu vavohu, the choshek meaning the darkness, right?
Darkness,
and then God brings order. But all this to say that I don't think it's, when we're talking about the ancient Near Eastern parallels, they are all much older, and there is definitely a sense of borrowing or importing, the form, right, of the story.
Yes.
It's a common story, right?
Yes.
But it's not as simple as, what we say, like a copy, like, Control C, Control V, copy paste.
Because as we've seen, it's connected to these themes within the larger book of Genesis. As you mentioned, parallels with the garden story.
And these stories are communicating with one another kind of knowingly, right? That this is a kind of move in the ancient world to retell a story with your values or your theological themes at the forefront. right? So, and this is what the Hebrew Bible is doing. So,
Hmm.
in some sense, it's in conversation with these other stories, right? Using a common dictum and a common set of narrative motifs.
And Hassan, the story doesn't end with just a flood, right? And
Right.
that's not the end. The world is flooded. There's more to it. Of course, there's famously, the ark lands in the region of Ararat, and strangely, the big mountain or the big two mountains in Turkey got the name Ararat later on. As you know, in fact, I think you mentioned earlier there's a tradition around the more ancient tradition is a mountain called Kardu, which is not the modern Mount Ararat. It's in the very southeastern corner of Turkey near the Iraqi border. Anyway, maybe we'll circle back to that because that's connected to the Quran as well. Now, the story continues in the Bible with everyone getting out. Right? They get out of the boat, and it doesn't end there either because Hassan, Noah makes a sacrifice to God, and that's pretty important theologically because there's this sort of deal made between God and Noah there.
Yeah, so one of the reason again that Noah brings 7 of the clean animals is to offer sacrifices to
Uh-huh.
God, right? Whereas there's 2 of the unclean animals that has to do with maybe different sources in this account. But what you have then afterwards is God makes a covenant with Noah, right? And the sign is his bow in the clouds, the
Mhm.
rainbow, and
Mhm.
God promises never to flood the earth again. Noah is then given a set of laws that go along with the covenant, and these laws are like you're not to kill. There's a certain other kind of
Mhm.
basic
Mhm.
kind of
Kind
moral
of like
dictums.
lowest common denominator,
Yeah,
universal laws. That's the entirety of
yeah.
humanity. The
So
8 people there. So then, in theory, maybe these apply to everyone.
right, and interestingly, I mean, this is just an interesting detail. Is what in that also though you find the death penalty,
Mm.
because you have he who kills by man shall his blood be shed. So you
Mm.
have that there in the story already.
Mm.
This idea of kind of the precursor to an eye for an eye, kind of a
Yes.
parody between
Yes. Yes.
the offense and the crime. The
Yes.
crime and the punishment. But in addition to this, you have the sacrifice brings with it a feast, a meal. You slaughter the animal, you eat it, and then Noah plants a vineyard and he makes wine, right?
Sounds
And he
good. It's
drinks it.
starting off well.
Yeah, that's right. And he drinks maybe a little too much of it. Regardless, the story says he drinks the wine, he gets
Yes.
drunk,
Yes.
and then one of his sons
Yes.
walks in on him and sees his nakedness.
Yeah,
And then
so
this leads to a
he has
curse.
is oh sorry to jump in, Hassan, but just to give the cast of characters for this theatrical moment. So he has 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Those are the 3, and they're actually connected. I think later on in Genesis as kind of 3 branches of humanity. This is
Yep.
where the term Semitic languages comes
Exactly.
from one of his sons,
From Shem.
Shem. And I mean, this story, Hassan, it's like a wonderful example of how the Bible, maybe especially the book of Genesis, is totally different from the Quran, just in what it's doing. Like the author is not trying to tell a story of righteousness, where Noah's perfect. That's not in
Right.
the interest. The author's telling a different kind of story. But in the Quran and Islamic ideas, of course, the Noah should be impeccable. But he's naked. He's probably drunk and naked, and his son, um, Ham, I guess it's Ham, walks in and maybe covers him up. Is that right? Or is it
Um,
Japheth and Shem maybe
no.
cover him up
Yeah,
walking
so Ham
backwards?
goes in
Yeah,
and says, "Oh, our dad's naked," comes out,
yeah,
tells the other guys, and then they go cover him up and then walk out backwards
backwards, so as
with
not to
him.
see his nakedness.
Yeah, so and I
Maybe.
mean, there's been a wealth of
Yeah,
elaboration on
yeah,
that, you know.
yeah. Yeah, and and then it's actually the son of Ham, I think, Canaan, who
Yeah.
is cursed by Noah. And this is a good example of there's lots of stuff going on in the mind of the biblical author. a lot of which has to do with what fancy biblical studies folks call etiology, like origin stories, like explaining why the Canaanites, for example, are like a troublesome, meddlesome people. Here's an origin story in which Noah already saw that they would be troublesome. Yeah, but I mean, it's like in the Noah movie, which I really like, even though theologically it's a total mess. But still kind of cool, what's his name? The gladiator is in there. What's his name? Guy who plays the gladiator?
I'm
Russell Crowe.
horrible.
Is that it?
Yeah,
I think it's
Russell
Russell
Crowe. It
Crowe.
is Russell Crowe.
Yeah, I mean, he's a mess in the movie. He's on the beach there. There's lots of beaches because the flood. And anyway, I mean, but it is a story which shows that when you read the book of Genesis, you have to keep in mind what the author is up to, right? The author is not trying to tell a story of Noah being a good guy and somehow
Right.
failing. So yeah, I mean, I think that's an important point. And nevertheless, Noah begins actually as a righteous character, and I think he's brought up in the New Testament. Hassan, Noah
Yeah.
has a place there, and so it's not just a Jewish story, it's also a Christian story.
Yeah, and I mean, it's Noah. I mean, is always seen, and I mean, is structurally in the text. And some say, more, I mean, he's more righteous than his generation, certainly. And
Yes.
even though he has, he gets drunk, we're supposed to know implicitly that this was a failure, and then this leads to more failures from his sons, and so on and so forth. Humanity just can't get it right.
Yes.
Just like in the garden, Adam fell, and so in some sense, this is Noah's fall, right? Both have to do with fruit, the fruit of the vine, the fruit of the tree.
Yeah. Wow. Hassan. Yes. Very interesting.
I give all of the credit for these to Professor Teeter, whose class I took at Harvard. So he's very good.
But you've transmitted it, so you get some of the credit.
Yeah, thanks. In the New Testament, the flood is mentioned a number of times, right? So in Matthew's gospel, the time, the flood is mentioned as like a moment, just like people were marrying and giving in marriage, and in times of Noah, the flood came, they didn't know about
suddenly.
It. Just so the Son of Man will come, and then there's other interpretations in the epistles. In 2 Peter, Noah's called a preacher of righteousness as well. So he and in some sense you could see that follows from the story because he is saved, whereas the rest of his people, or all people, are not.
Yeah.
So.
But now, Hassan, did I hear you right that you said a preacher of righteousness? Is that what you said?
That's right, yes.
Well, Hassan, it just so happens that there's another scripture out there in which Noah is not only righteous, but also a preacher of righteousness.
So, Gabriel, you mentioned that in the Quran, Noah is a preacher. So in Surah 11, verse 25, it says, "We sent Noah to his people," and then it has Noah say, "I am to you a clear warner." So you have that motif explicitly. And then we also see the response to his preaching, which is interesting. I would like to hear your thoughts on this, but it says in verse 38 later on, "And he was building the ark," that is Noah, "and whenever notables among his people passed by him, they would ridicule him. He said, 'If you ridicule us, we ridicule you, just as you ridicule.'" So what is the relationship between Noah and his people and his preaching in the Quran?
Yeah, dramatic scenes here in Quran 11, named after another prophet, Hud. But there is a chapter of the Quran, chapter 71, which is named after Noah. So by tradition, he does get a chapter or surah of the Quran named after him. I mean, Hassan, the big point here is that this does not happen in the account of Genesis. And then maybe we see something developing in the New Testament passage you referred to.
Yeah,
where
but
Noah
not quite like this. I mean, you don't have an interaction between him and the people, and and or even an account of the opposition of his people to him.
100%. So you can imagine why the author of the epistle, that reference in the epistle Peter, would have Noah be a preacher of righteousness. Just think about the Genesis account. If he's a good guy, he's going to warn his people. He must have preached to them, even if Genesis doesn't quote his preaching. But just as you said, Hassan, here, what we have in the Quran is this back and forth. And you know, this also, I mean, I guess a tit for tat, right? Because you know, Noah says, if you ridicule us, we ridicule you. uh so I mean, that's a major vibe in the Quran, which is this competition between the believers and the unbelievers. The unbelievers, you know, they have either their false gods or maybe the devil as their patron, their wali in
Mm,
Arabic, their master. And the believers have God, and you know, God's going to win. The flood is going to wipe them out. And
yeah.
you know, the character of Noah then maybe is manifesting the personality of, according to the Quran, the Muhammad himself, the prophet of the Quran, who preaches to his people as well.
Great. And then you have, that's all I think spot on. Um, I, I, I could get stuck in a rabbit hole there, but I'm gonna keep going. Um, Verse 39 says, "You will know upon whom will come a humiliating punishment, and upon whom will fall lasting suffering." So this is, I think, another motif, right? Specifically Quranic, which is the punishment stories, the impending punishment on those who disbelieve in a prophet that's given to them.
Yeah, 100%. And you know, this does fit sort of the standard, as you said. That's the famous phrase among scholars of the Quran: punishment story. So in Quran 11 and other surahs too, like 7 and 26, you know, one prophet after another, we have their story. They always preach. The people always reject them, and the people are always punished. You know, it's with Hud, with Saleh, with Shuaib, with all these characters. But Hassan, there is one difference with the story of Noah in this chapter, and only in this chapter, which is we're introduced to his son.
Yes.
Now, Genesis, we heard of sons of Noah. We spoke of, you know, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Here we have apparently a different character altogether.
Yeah. So tell me more about Noah's son. What happens to him in the Quran?
Yeah, I mean, this is actually a situation for the interpreters. There's so many sort of theological obstacles or pitfalls, maybe here, and beginning with this son does not get on the ark,
Wow.
which I mean, like the standard thing is that the believers are saved and unbelievers are punished and killed. So if he's not in the ark, he's punished and killed. And then is he an unbeliever?
Hmm.
Can a prophet have an unbelieving son? Well, I mean, maybe there are references, I think, in Quran 46 to the possibility a believer could have an unbelieving child. And Abraham had an unbelieving father. So maybe that's okay.
Right.
But you know, as the story concludes and the son dies in the flood, we see Noah sort of expressing regret over the death of this son. Maybe he's reprimanded by God. The interpreters split over this. But Hassan, before maybe we speak about kind of the pathos of Noah over the death of his son, there is an intriguing possible connection with another passage in the Quran, because in Quran 66, there's a reference to the wife of Noah. We don't hear about in Quran 11, the wife of Noah, as a sort of representative of an unfaithful woman. And that led the interpreters to think about this. Wait, if we have a bad son in Quran 11, if Noah's wife is kind of a bad woman in Quran 66, if maybe a son of a prophet shouldn't be an unbeliever, Hassan, maybe it wasn't his son after all.
Mm.
And there's another reason why they argue this point, because in Quran 11:46, God says to Noah about his son, he is not of your family. What if he means it literally? That, in other words, Noah's wife, yes, it was her son, but maybe she hid something from him and it was not actually Noah's son.
Ah, very interesting. So that yeah. And how does Noah's son die? I think there's an interesting way that he does die in the flood. It's not that he's just, is sitting at home watching whatever sport they played then, but he tries something of his own volition. to try to escape the wrath,
Yeah,
right?
100%. And, it's kind of a dramatic moment. It's, I think, one of the more sort of artistic, theatrical moments in the Quran. Somehow they're having a conversation. I mean, it's kind of difficult to imagine because the Quran says the waves came between them like mountains.
Mm,
So how are they able to have a conversation? It would probably be pretty loud there. And Noah says to his son, get on the boat with us. Don't stay there with the unbelievers. And the son says, no, I will take shelter on a mountain. And Noah reminds him there's no protection from God, basically, except um, in the ark. And I guess there's easy ways of seeing deeper, almost poetic elements to that conversation, right? Because he's counting on his own ability to survive, right? He's trusting that I can manage this on my own. I don't need the divine help of the ark. I mean, you could spiritualize that very quickly. Like, if you're a
yeah,
khatib, maybe giving a
yeah.
sermon or something, and we counted on his own abilities, he's going to make it to a mountain. Guess what? Even the highest mountains will be covered by the destructive waters of the flood.
Right. Yeah.
Can,
Absolutely.
can I mention, Hassan, another sort of just brief tangent
By all
on
means.
this element of Noah's son, which is that there is an Egyptian poet by the name of Ahmad Dunqul, who wrote, I think it was early 20th century. Someone in the comments can let us know. But he actually wrote a poem about the conversation in Arabic. I think it's Muhawara Baina Nuh wa Ibnihi, or Ma Ibn Nuh, something like that. Conversation with the son of Noah, in which Dunqul, by the way, was a Marxist, not very religious. And he said, no, Noah's son made the right choice.
Mm.
Because he remained with the people, he even died with the people. So is that like Marxist vibe there? Solidarity with the people. Obviously, that flips everything upside down. He's not very popular with more religious types in Egypt.
That's very interesting. I also want to go back to Noah's wife, right? So, I mean, exegetically, that's just a very interesting question. What you do there, with possible whether the Quran is hinting at possible unchastity. What do you think? Just based on the text of the Quran itself, do you think that's a plausible reading of it?
No.
No. Yeah, makes sense.
In fact, there's a problem. There's a problem in verse 42 because we have here a reference to. I mean, the narrator of the Quran says Noah called out to his son. So it's Ibnahu there.
Right.
And, that's a problem because the divine narrator of the Quran speaks of his son, Noah's son.
Exactly.
And there's actually traditions of a Quranic variant there. It's a problem, right? Because to make that a feminine, to make the feminine pronoun, you need a different H and then a long A. So the script actually changes. And so, some people say, no, well, you can actually just have the vowel without changing the script. So Ibnaha, which would then mean her son.
Right.
I mean, so I don't know if it's clear what's going on there. Like the divine narrator of the story can't be wrong. So if it really is her son and not his son, if he were a cuckold, which some people would say is impossible anyway,
right,
for a prophet, for his wife to cuckold him, then, maybe you can make it all work. Maybe, you could just do that instead of what the standard Cairo text reads, which is Ibnahu, which is really the reasonable reading. So they're obviously doing some gymnastics there to try to make it be the case. What's much more probable, Hassan, is that when God says to Noah that your son is not of your family, there's a deeper teaching of the Quran here, which is what matters is the family of faith.
Right.
Your Muslim brother, that's your family. That's more important than, the blood ties of a biological son or biological.
And this plays out elsewhere in the Quran.
100%.
Well. So
100%.
Yeah. So I want to go back also to Noah's wife again, and back to the part of the Quran that we were reading. Verse 40 says, and when our command came, and this translation is very interesting because it says, and the volcano erupted, we said, bored into it, that is the ark, a pair of every kind, and your family, except those whom the sentence has already passed and those who believe. But none believed with him except a few. So a volcano erupted, or is there something else going on here?
Yeah, volcano is definitely not in the Arabic at all. The phrase there is afar at-tanur. So literally, the oven overflowed. So, I mean, the translator here isn't just kind of making stuff up, because there's lots of speculation, especially in modern sort of scientific strands of thought, where, there's a real desire to make the Quran match with science, maybe even make it miraculous in its science.
Right.
So, I mean, the Arabic says tanur. Tanur means a bread oven, basically. It's still used in modern Arabic.
Right. Even in English, you might recognize it, a tanur, which you make, naans in the tanur, like around the walls of the inside or something.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So, I mean, that's what the word means. Both Muslim scholars and sort of academics have been tempted to think about, wow, what symbolically could this bread oven actually mean? There's a tradition out there in some rabbinic source about the waters of the flood being hot.
Right.
So maybe it's that. I mean, the Quran could have just said the waters of the flood are hot. You don't have to have a bread oven involved. Hassan, this kind of shocked me, but there was a really excellent article recently published, I think, in the journal Arabica, by the author Mangeya, I think, a French author. I think the article's in French. Someone maybe will link to it in the comments, who makes a really convincing argument that this is directly connected to early Jewish traditions about Noah's wife baking bread at the moment that the flood took place, and literally water overflowing from her bread oven. So, I see why people want to find volcanoes and something scientific, because the deep kind of fountains of the deep burst forth.
Right.
But it seems in this case, it's really a bread oven.
Wow. Well, that's very interesting. That connection could be really pondered. Maybe we should move on, though, into modern interpretations and polemics surrounding the flood.
Devoted in its entirety to Noah's preaching to his erring fellow men, this surah depicts symbolically every conscious believer's struggle against blind materialism and the resulting lack of all spiritual values. Hassan, that is the introduction to the 71st chapter of the Quran by Muhammad Asad, the Austrian Jew who converted to Islam in the early 20th century, who speaks about this symbolic value of the story of Noah. The 71st surah, of course, is named Nuh in Arabic. But the truth is, if you go online, you're going to find a lot less spiritual values kind of language than you will usually Christians and Muslims fighting about whether the Quranic or the biblical story of Noah is more accurate, more or less, in its literal form.
Yeah, that's that's a regrettable fact, Gabriel. What are some of these debates like?
Yeah, I mean, there are two on this question.
Yeah.
Usually, the team on the offensive are Muslims who will point to two things, and Christians are sort of like, what do you say in soccer or football? Soccer, they're all just playing defense, all 10 men behind the ball. So, Muslims will usually point out two things. One is the drunkenness of Noah,
right,
which is spoken on a bit. And then the other is that the Quran seems to leave room for this being a local flood, which, maybe scientifically is scientifically more plausible, because there are local floods, right? Whereas we already said a global flood is impossible. Hassan, I watched a video with tons and tons and tons of views. It's an English video, one of those dramatic YouTube videos, very sort of like, I don't know, like soundtracks in the back with like drums and sweeping music meant to sort of give you goosebumps, right? Speaking about how, first Noah's drunk in the Bible. Also, the Bible says it's a global flood. The poor Christians and Jews, they got all this wrong. Thank goodness the Quran fixed the historical record. with this account of a local flood. But I mean, Hassan, really both teams they sort of miss the big question, which is, is there a historical account? Is Noah a figure of history or a figure of scripture? And anyway, is scripture, either the Bible or the Quran, meant to tell scientific history, or rather guide us, in a spiritual way?
Yeah, I think it's funny because I want to ask you what you think about the actual Quranic evidence, but as far as the Bible goes, you have, I mean, and within kind of Christian Jewish circles as well, you have these same debates playing out, right? I would say there's a growing number of Christians, including the, I think, 1917 Catholic Encyclopedia, who says that, well, okay, a global flood is untenable, but, it was a local flood, all right, because Aretz, land, the word that's translated sometimes to land and sometimes to earth, and, could
Mhm.
be just the land in front of you, a given nation, a given place, or it could be all land, right? It's ambiguous, and it's an ambiguous term. So we can take Aretz being the world, there's the newspaper Haaretz, the world, or it could be Aretz as in, Massachusetts, or, wherever.
Yeah, the
So,
whole earth,
and
the
you can do
whole
the
audit.
same, and you can do the
Yeah.
same thing with Ard, right? In Arabic.
Yeah, 100%. So, those Muslims and Muslim interpreters really are split on this. So, those Muslims who argue that there's a global flood here will often point to Quran 71, verse 26, in which Noah prays to God, do not let a single unbeliever alal ard,
Yep.
on the earth, ard, but maybe it could be land, if ard, which is cognate to the Hebrew word aretz, just means like the place around here.
The
Ard is
ground.
a funny word in modern standard Arabic. Yeah, it can mean the ground. Like I dropped it on the ard. Pick it up from the ard. Pick it up off the ground. You know, uh, it's
But
just one of those things that
yeah,
fuels the internet, and it's just maddening, right? Because what the story really is that the Quran, from its own perspective, is not recovering historical evidence documentation, but rather is developing a story which had been part of Jewish and Christian tradition. It doesn't end in the New Testament.
right.
We only got to the New Testament, but it continues in early Christian writing,
Yep.
first few centuries, and in the Jewish, so the
Midrash
Talmud, the
and the Talmud.
Midrash, which
Yep.
develops in the fifth, sixth centuries, when you have the Babylonian and Palestinian Talmuds.
Right.
And so the Quran is engaging, and it's with its own theology
Yeah.
in those sorts of traditions.
And even the
Now,
biblical account, sorry to jump in here, Gabriel, but
yeah,
briefly,
yeah,
even the biblical account that you have in Genesis is part of a tradition that, as we talked about,
from the
spans
ancient Near
further
East,
back, right?
yeah.
Right. So,
And maybe just a note to end on, Hassan. One of the reasons why today all of this has been turbocharged on the internet. And there's so much drama around arguments over, is the Quran or the Bible more accurate when it comes to the flood, is you have this trend that really begins in the beginning of the 20th century. Sort of the poster child for this movement is the Rashid Ridda, the Syrian Lebanese scholar who does most of his work in Egypt, by which Muslims are sort of fighting back against Christians, missionaries, and others by claiming that the Quran is a much more sort of reasonable scientific text, and then this like doubles or triples when you have a French doctor by the name of Maurice Bucaille, very mysterious figure. We should do another episode on Maurice Bucaille, Hassan, who basically kind of doubles down on everything Rashid Ridda says and argues that the Quran is, has in his day 20th century science in it, which proves it's miraculous, from the spider's web to the mountains, to the flood. He
yeah.
also kind of bullies the Bible in there too, because he says the Bible doesn't have this. And now the internet is filled with YouTube videos and others which speak about scientific miracles. Now, Muslim influencers today who embrace that are not embracing the classical tradition of Islam.
Right.
Not even Ibn Taymiyyah, or let's say a more scientifically inclined interpreter, maybe Fakhruddin Razi, even Ibn Sina. Avicenna, they didn't speak about the Quran that way.
Right.
They are part of the 20th, 21st century Rashid Ridda, Maurice Bukai vibe, which really is a break from the tradition. But that's where it gets turbocharged, is the idea of scientific miracles.
Right. And speaking of the tradition, I think there's an interesting bit from At-Tabari in which he's talking about in his Tarikh towards the end of the second volume, in the English translation at least, um, the Persian view of the flood. Right. So I'll just briefly read, and I'll put this up as well. The Magians, that the Persians, have no knowledge of the flood. They say our rule continued uninterrupted since the age of Jeyumart, who they say is identical with Adam. So they deny the flood, and they say, skipping ahead a little bit here, some of them acknowledge the flood and assume that it took place in the clime of Babylon, and nearby regions, whereas the descendants of Jeyumart had their dwellings in the east, and the flood did not reach them. So it's a local flood, they say. Waqala Abu Ja'far, right? And Abu Ja'far al-Tabari says, the information given by God concerning the flood contradicts their statement. And what he says is the truth. Noah, and now he's quoting the Quran, Noah called upon us, and surely good are those who respond. We delivered him and his family from the great distress and made his offspring the survivors. God thus indicates that Noah's offspring are the survivors and nobody else.
The only survivors. Therefore,
Right.
It's global.
Exactly. And this is, I think, the common interpretation of the classical tradition, and also the biblical tradition, and also the early Christian tradition, that everybody alive today traces their lineage back to Noah through, Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
We're all brothers or cousins, at least.
Right, exactly. So, and I think, I'd love to hear just briefly as we wrap up here, do you think the Quran envisions a global flood or a local flood?
Absolutely, a global flood. These are the universal traditions of late antiquity. The Quran nowhere sort of takes them on and says, the Yahud wa Nasara claim it's global, but here's the right scientific story. It's local. It's clear, both, as Abu Ja'far al-Tabari says, that's the idea. Anyway, the debate is really a red herring, or a dead end street. What's going on here is the Quran, like the Bible, has this theological vision of God's relationship with humanity. They both tell a story, begins with one man, with Adam, and continues on, goes to his two sons, and Surah Al-Ma'idah, on to Noah, etc., etc. This is a biblical story, which is meant for spiritual edification. We know now today from good historical and scientific research about DNA, Homo sapiens, come from earlier hominids, from the larger evolution of life, from about 2 billion years ago, halfway through the geological history of the Earth. Let's say theoretically you could make a good case for Noah's flood being historical and scientific and local, but then you still have Adam created from dirt in the Quran, right? So, and that doesn't make the Quran better or worse than the Bible.
Right.
They're both spiritual texts, and they're best read spiritually.
Yeah, and the Bible, clearly, I would say the same thing. There have been, Christian and Jewish attempts to localize the flood based on a very similar logic, and I think it's very obvious from the biblical story that all humans descend from Noah, that all flesh God repents of all creation, and all flesh is destroyed in the flood, all living things except for Noah and his family,
8 people,
and the animals in the ark.
Well, Hassan, thank you so much for this engaging conversation about all of the ancient and modern controversies. Friends, we now know that all of you and all of us, we're all cousins, all connected spiritually, if not genetically, to the story of Noah. And just do us a solid and like this video. Remember to subscribe, maybe even join, maybe get on the ark of the membership community of exploring the Quran and the Bible. So until next time, bye everyone.